Hello and welcome to Growing Your Sign Business with WARDJET Waterjets. I'm your host, Benji Macera, and I'm joined today, as always, by Jeff Day, our Senior Application Engineer here at WARDJET. We're going to talk today about how adding WaterJet, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you may not, may be coming from the router side of the business, and how do we add that technology into a sign making business to add to your overall capabilities, and when's the right time to do that, and what kind of things can you actually do with the technology. So first we'll start talking about when is WaterJet the right choice for these. Again, a lot of these materials are going to overlap on the router side as well as the WaterJet. But where the WaterJet makes the most sense if you're already using something like a router or a knife system is going to be ferrous metals, mild steel, stainless, things like that that are a lot harder, where you would need really a machining center for something like that, as opposed to a router system that's going to be great for aluminum and things of that nature, and acrylics as well. Then stone in particular. Granite, marble, porcelain, nice stone signs that you'd like to be able to do that you really can't do unless you've got a dedicated wet saw or somebody doing that by hand, which we're going to show you a little bit later, focusing on stone and how to cut that with a water jet and some of the things you can do and some of the benefits of the water jet of that over some of these other processes. Another area where it's great for water jet is thick materials. Again, you can process acrylic, something like that, with a router. You are going to have to take multiple passes on that in order to get through that material, say if we're talking something 2 to 3 inches thick. But whereas a water jet, the overall feed rate is going to be slower, but you are going to be a single pass. So there's going to be less tool wear on there as you're just going for a single pass. Now, one thing that you will note is that with WaterJet, specifically on acrylic, you're always going to get a sanded edge look because you are actually abrading the material. It is actually controlled accelerated erosion. So the garnet is going to actually rough up that edge of the material. But let's say, for instance, you're looking to do something out of acrylic like you see there on the screen, some words that you'd like to do, but you still want that nice edge that router will be able to get you. So one of the best things you could do for that is something we use in a lot of different thicker materials with WaterJet is we do near net shape cutting. And what that means is, so for the example you see on the screen, we're going to go a little bit larger than what our finished size we want that to be, and we're going to cut that out with the WaterJet. We're going to go nice and quicker through there, again, faster than you could with multiple passes of another technology. And then we're going to transfer that over to the router, where we can then go with the router on just a quick pass on the outside and actually get that finish that we'd like to do. What that's going to do is that's going to help you be efficient on both machines. We're not going to be bogging down the router with multiple passes of a thick material, and we're still going to get that edge quality that we really want out of signage of acrylic or things of that nature. So let's talk about some of the general benefits of WaterJet. This is clearly going to be a little bit more focused to those that aren't as familiar or who are doing some other processes currently for your signage material. First off, WaterJet is a cold process. I spoke earlier about that being controlled accelerated erosion. There is going to be no heat affected zone. So we're not actually heating the material to cut. We're not actually shearing it or really weakening it at all at the cut site. It is erosion. It is cold. So therefore, we're not actually intrinsically changing the properties of the material when we are cutting it. It is also single pass. I talked about that at the acrylic as well. Maybe a little bit slower, but it is always going to be a single pass through process when dealing with WaterJet. Another thing is we can jump from material to material without tooling changes. Some other CNC machinery, you are going to have to change what type of bit, what type of cutting tool that you're going to do depending on the material. Say you need to do something with something with stainless and then go to something that's foam backed. Instead of changing those two tools, the only thing that'll change with WaterJet is we're just going to be changing the speed and feed with which we cut that. But the same toolset can actually process both of those. since WaterJet is a non-contact cutting process, it is very easy to go from one material to another within a matter of seconds. It's all going to be programmatically controlled on how that's going to cut. So very, very versatile. And then there's also the ability to cut 5-axis geometries. Clearly, this is going to depend on what kind of configuration you have on your WaterJet, but we can do undercuts, we can do bevels, you can do complex 5-axis shapes. Very, very easy with WaterJet. Again, nice quick through process. So very, very ideal if you are looking for something like that on your signage. Here's a few examples that we've got of some signs that you could process and make out of a WaterJet. You'll see there on the left, you've got something that we've done quite often is actually kind of a dual process sign where we've done a stainless fascia that has got the whatever lettering or wording that you would like to have cut out of, say, stainless. And then we use that same program to develop an acrylic push-through. So you're still left with the nice stainless finish. You can backlight that, still get some of the qualities of acrylic that you want there as well. You'll see there in the middle, really important, not only can WaterJet be used for wording and the actual signage itself, but a lot of the support structures that are under that as well. So if you are doing a large signage installation and you need large plates for bolt patterns and things like that in order to actually control the structure, very, very easy to do out of WaterJet. Say you got to cut inch-thick steel and then transition over into actually cutting your signage material, not a problem with WaterJet. That particular example, you can see that those are brackets that were cut straight, cut flat, but then a few little relief structures put in there to make bending of those easy for, say, corner pieces. And then you've got full metal signs that you can see up there on the right with that conversion work sign. That would be, multiple pieces all cut out on a WaterJet with some surface finish and then assembled finally. So the real point of it is, how can we then maximize efficiency by adding a WaterJet, and how can we reduce waste material? One of the things we're going to talk about here in a bit is how do we process stone? That we're going to show you a video of us actually walking through that. One of those things is you're going to see later, Jeff's going to cut it, is stone when trying to cut with a WaterJet. You cannot actually process it the same as some other materials, steel, things like that. We actually go full in with 60,000 PSI and abrasive, cuts right through the material, pierces through no problem. If we were to do that same thing on stone, however, we might as well just take a hammer to the material, but you're going to fracture that material. That stream coming out of the WaterJet is coming a little over Mach 2. So a lot of force being hit. And as you can imagine, put that on something that's a little bit more brittle, you're going to have nothing but chipping or breakage of that material. So we're going to use what we call a circular low pressure pierce. On there you'll see when we start cutting, we're going to turn our pressure down quite a bit on the machine. We're going to go a little bit slower, and we're going to reduce the amount of abrasive that we use. And we're actually going to essentially drill through the material, very, very slow, making small circular passes in order to work away some of that material without so much pressure on any one point. That's going to allow us to get through the material, kind of pre-pierce our material, and then we can bump up our pressure and then go through with our high pressure and do our cutting. We will not have any issues with breaking at that point because we're not actually introducing that to the surface of the material. So again, this is kind of ideal for stonework with WaterJet. Another way that we can do the same thing that we're talking about cutting without actually fracturing the material is we can start off the material and move our way into the cutting. Again, that will do the same thing as long as we're not hitting that surface with an initial pierce. We should have no issues with checking. And with stone or any brittle material, support is going to be very, very important of those pieces as well. We do have a lot of pressure being pushed and exerted onto that material. So you don't want to have an open space or material that's hanging out in air because it is very easy to introduce pressure and crack that material. So with anything WaterJet, it's always very, very important to support that piece both under the material and then also keeping that piece down to make sure that you're not going to have any movement when that material is cutting. So here we're going to have Jeff show, we do have a specific programming and CAD-CAM package that we use here at WARDJET called iGEMS. Has a lot of different modules that are set up for various applications, some 5-axis models, things like that. He's going to go over a little bit on some SignMaker for iGEMS. You can see some things with some specific text tools and things like that. But the one we're really going to focus on is the image trace in iGEMS. So particular to a sign business, if you've got an image or a logo or something else like that that you've only got an image of, he's going to show you how to bring that into iGEMS. Go ahead and trace around there automatically, do a little bit of cleanup, and be able to send that off to your WaterJet for cutting. So take it away, Jeff.
Today we're going to look at the SignMaker module. So there's usually a lot of interest when you get into WaterJet cutting for making signs or converting graphics into files that you can cut, and that's the purpose of the SignMaker module. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here. Let's see that one. All right, so now you should all be seeing my iGEM screen here. So the SignMaker module, if you purchase this, is on the Tools tab. So click onto here. We've got a few different modules on here. CAM Tools is also an optional module, which is often quite helpful to use in conjunction with the SignMaker module. So we usually want to get both of those together. So take a look first at SignMaker is made up of then in turn 3 different areas. Font tracer allows you to convert text to something that you can cut. So we'll start with this one here. Click on this and this little window comes up, and in this window is a listing of all the TrueType fonts that you have loaded on your system. So if there's a font that you want to use that you don't see here, you can just go Google whatever font you want, TrueType font, install it, and then it'll show up here on this list. So take a look first at a Arial font. So you can choose the font, and then over here you've got a couple different options as far as how you want the text to go across the screen. If I just do a linear cursor, it's just going to go in a straight line across whatever, wherever I start typing, it'll just go straight across there. So I'll put our cap locks on here, WARDJET. So that would be a linear cursor or linear text. So at this point, you can't really do anything with it as far as trying to create a part. If I go to my CAM tab and I try to create a part and I try to select this, nothing happens. So when you first start using that, that can be a little bit confusing. First, you have to explode the font. So click on the explode icon. I've got mine up here as a quick click, or on the CAD tools, click on explode, drag a box around this, and now you can do things with it as far as creating a toolpath and things out of it. So if I want those letters to drop out, draw a rectangle around there, and we've got that. Now, of course, a situation like this, these A's would be, the middle of the A, R, and D would be dropping out. So there's a handy tool on the CAM tools area to help with that, to basically create a stencil if you don't have a stencil font. So if I go to the CAM tools subdirectory here, there's this polyjoin command, which is quite handy. And when you start this command down here at the bottom, it'll prompt you to specify width. And I can either click 2 points, or if I know what I want my width of my little joining tab here to be, I'll just type in 030 and then specify first point. So that's where you basically want the this little joiner to start at. And right now my ortho is not on. F8, turn my ortho on and drag that straight down and connects all that. So then we can do the same thing over here and over here. So that's a very handy tool when you're doing letters and things like this. So then if we go back and create our part, then those things won't drop out. So that was the linear cursor. The other option there was a object cursor. So the object cursor, you can have your text follow something. So I'll just draw a circle here and go back into the tools area. back to font tracer, and instead of doing linear cursor, it can choose object cursor, and at the bottom says pick object, and wherever I click is wherever the text is going to start. And then it wants to know what side of this object that we want the text to be on. If I want the text to be inside, I would click here. I want the text to be on the outside, I left click out here. And then as I start typing, the text will follow that arc. So you can get a little bit more fancy if you want to do spline. So I can do something like this in here. And I'll just do something like that. And go back to my font tracer, object cursor, follow this object on this side here, and then it will follow that curve around there. So, and then the other button here, you have height, so that just determines the height that you want for that text. So, and then again, once you've got it at this point here, go back, explode it, and then you can add your toolpath and such to it. So there's also things in here like symbols. Click on the symbols area. You scroll down, you can see if there's any fun little symbol things that you can cut. There's wingdings, things like that, based on, again, what fonts you have loaded on your system. I've downloaded a Stencil font myself. So we scroll up a little bit. There we go, Stencil. So this is, again, just one that I downloaded off the web, TrueType font, and then you've got a stencil that you can very easily use. So that's basically it for font tracer, pretty simple there. And then the image tracer starts to get a little bit more fun stuff. Click on this, and this dialog box comes up, and you can click on the open button here, and we can import either BMP, JPEG, or PNG files. So I've got some different examples here. So for example, this golfer here did something like that. So select what you want, click on open, and it brings you into this this preview window here. So depending on the quality of the image, you may need to use this little slider bar up here, which will basically darken or lighten the image and filter out some residue that you may not want to bring in with the file. So I'm just going to leave this one here right at 50 where it started. And invert allows you to decide whether this is basically going to be an inside or an outside cut, or you can do that later. So if I just leave it as that, that's good. Smoothing, it'll basically do a curve fit through the points to smooth things out. And I'll show you an example of that here next. So you bring it in, and then you can go through and you can smooth edges out and things like that. So first thing I'll usually do when I bring something in like this is, again, on the cam tools area, I'll use this cleanup button here, and this will help to reduce the number of points that are in the file. So click on cleanup, and then down at the bottom it says specify tolerance, and I'll usually start with a tolerance of 0. So that means it's just going to remove any duplicated entities. So it filtered out a few points there. And then what you can do is slowly do that a couple more times and bump up the tolerance. So if you do 5 thousandths, if there's any points basically within 5 thousandths of another, it'll kind of filter some of those out. So again, there aren't as many points. So we went from 1,143 segments in this to 153. So it'll be a little bit easier to work with, probably a little bit smoother cut results. Once you've cleaned that up a little bit, there's also this handy edge fix command. So this can be used to smooth out curves and things. So if we come in here and we want this to be maybe not so pronounced, I can basically click 2 points and drag an arc out here and click when I've got it how I like it. So this is used quite a lot when you're doing this this sort of work. So click a couple points and drag it out there. I've got my snaps on. I can turn those off if I want to have a little more flexibility there. So that's a fairly simple one.
Starting in iGEMS 2021, release 2493 that I've got here, you can now open up PDF files. So I've got a example of one here. So if we don't have a DXF or DWG file, having access to a PDF can program off of this. So we'll go ahead and open that up here in iGEMS. So iGEMS menu, you can use either open or import. So there's the PDF. So it'll bring it in. So you may need to run the analyze and cleanup tools on this to close up any gaps or smooth out some lines. So first I'll just analyze this. And we may have some gaps in there. So I'll go ahead and I'll do the cleanup tool, and I'm going to do tolerance of 0, which will just remove any duplicated items. If I do the analyze tool again here. So now we don't have any red X's, but if we zoom in here, we'll see some of these edges aren't particularly smooth. So depending on the application, if you want to smooth that out, of course you can use your edge fix command up here, and I can start here, go over to here, and do an arc and things like that. So it's be pretty handy for artwork like this, where you may not get that DXF or DWG file, bring in the PDF file and spend a little bit of time here just cleaning it up. Then once you've got it cleaned up, you'll want to check that scaled appropriately. So for example, if I measure from here to here, this is 135, and that slot there is basically probably supposed to be a little bit over 1/4 inch, since this is going to be programmed for 1/4 inch thick material. So then we can go to our CAD tab and use our scale command. Base point, hit enter. I'm going to do R for reference down here at the bottom, and I'm going to tell it this dimension here. I want that to actually be, I'll call it 260, give myself a little bit of room for it to slide together. And now if I measure that, it should come in at 260. So that's good.
And here you can see us cutting that same image that we traced and actually assembling the finished piece. Shows how you can easily take a reference image and create a sign and or a cut object out of that image. So now we're going to go back and actually watch. I mentioned earlier we're going to do some stonework with WaterJet. So as you can see here on the screen, we've got our AAG, our Axes Automation Group logo. This is actually a piece that we cut out and we're going to be bringing to the ISA show in Vegas just this week. Actually starting today, or if you're catching this a little bit earlier, it would have been the previous week. But we are going to show you how we're going to be cutting a thick stone, thick granite on this in this case, and some steel supports for that as well. But you're going to see some of the techniques that I mentioned, the circular low pressure piers. We're not going to show you the whole cut. It's going to take quite some time to do that, and probably not very interesting after the initial bits, but it is important to note that some of these features that you're going to see on this AAG logo, you can see the internals on the A's and some of the internal radii on the G. Those kind of things aren't going to be possible with different technology, say like a wet saw, where you're going to be limited to the amount of radius you can do, because you have to account for overcuts, or how do you going to get the blade through that stone. So this is going to be a pretty good highlight of the kind of intricacies you can get with WaterJet and the kind of accuracy that you can do out of a thicker material on that. So I will go ahead and let some of the cutting show, and then we'll come back and we'll take some questions. Okay, so as I mentioned before, this is the granite that we're cutting, and you're going to see the low pressure circular pierce. You can see those small little movements that the head is making, kind of making sure that we're not just staying in one spot, constantly moving so that material can actually get out of the hole. You'll see, since we're not actually going through the material, that is still going to be coming back up, and right there you can see that it's actually pierced the material. So now we are all the way through and able to cut like normal. So this will speed up a little bit as we do our secondary pierce that we have to do, as we have a couple different spots we have to cut on this piece. And then we'll go ahead and go back to the previous hole, and we will then ramp up the pressure back up to 60,000 psi, and then we'll zoom in here and you can actually see that we're going to start doing some cutting. So I'll let some of the cutting play, as you can see some of the perimeters, and then we'll show the finished piece. And now we'll see the finished signs there. We actually cut some stands there with our logos for Axes and WARDJET as well on the same setup that we did for the Granite signs. So we hope today we showed you a little bit of the versatility of sign making with WaterJet. So now we're going to go ahead and open up the floor to any questions that you might have. Okay, so we've got a few questions that have popped in here over the course. So Mike's got a couple questions. One regarding the size of the machines that we offer. So we run the gamut on what we offer. Smallest machine that we offer is a 2 foot by 4 foot processing area in our A series machine. That also comes in a 4 by 4 foot. That's probably a really good place to start if you're only doing a few things here or there, some smaller pieces, smaller sign work. Most common is going to be a 5 by 10 machine in our X series line, and that's got quite a few sizes as well that you can see if you go to wardjet.com. And then we've got even larger machines that go up to 13 feet by 40 feet plus. So it really does run the gamut for just all going to depend on the configuration and kind of overall size that you're looking for. But all do have the same capabilities for cutting. Same horsepower pumps are available on those, so you can get really just more about the material size you want to fit on there. And then Mike also mentioned or asked, curious about cutting fabric on WaterJet. You can. It's going to depend on the fabric. Something that's a little bit more fibrous, a little bit more loose, is going to have a little more trouble with it. If you have a strong backer, I've seen people cut with, say, fabric laid on plywood. There is the potential that those fibers can actually be pushed down into the board as opposed to actually being cut. So it really is more of a trial and error on which one you're looking for. But that does bring up a point. If you do have a material or a fabric that you're trying to see if it can be processed with WaterJet, feel free to contact us, reach out, sales@wardjet.com. We're happy to have you send some material. We can do a few slices of that, see how it processes, and answer any questions you have, excuse me, regarding process or applications. And then Jim asked, can vector files be imported without needing to use iGEMs? Yes, they can. So we have got our WardCam package that comes with every WaterJet that goes out. We have unlimited seats. You can add it on as many computers as you want. That is going to be able to accept any DXF or DWG files. Most of your graphics programs, Illustrator, CorelDRAW, things like that, can export as DXF. It is going to be a little bit similar to what we saw on that cleanup of that turkey geometry, where Illustrator in particular does like to take those smooth arcs that we like to see when we're doing CNC motion, and it does break it down into segments. May not be a big issue if you're doing something small, but as you get bigger, larger arcs, you may actually see those, and it might be a good idea to get an AutoCAD program or something similar to that that's going to program those curves in arcs as opposed to segments. But to getting started, I used to use it all the time going right out of Illustrator when I was doing more graphic things, signage, things like that. It does work just fine as long as you can export as a DXF. We can go ahead and process it. So I don't see any more questions, so we'll go ahead and end the webinar here today. But if you do think of some questions after the fact, or you just want to learn more, or something that we weren't able to cover today, feel free to reach out to us. It's sales@wardjet.com. We're happy to have one of our regional managers reach out with you, talk about your application, and see what kind of system might be right for you. So thank you very much, and we'll see everybody next time.